Hello, and welcome back to Love Notions. I am Whitney from TomKat Stitchery over at TomKat Stitchery, and today we're going to be talking about 5 tips to help make your sewing time a little bit more productive. Now, in addition to, we'll be talking also a little bit about my Breckenridge Henley right here, which is today's Feature Friday pattern, so $5 today only. But I digress. Like I mentioned, I am Whitney, and I am a YouTube content creator here on YouTube, obviously, over at the TomKat Stitchery handle, where we do all things garment sewing. I love working with Love Notions as well. And today we're going to be talking about, like I said, 5 ways that we can make our sewing time a little bit more productive. Now, does your sewing time, number one, always need to be super productive? Absolutely not. Sewing time is our creative time. This is a great source of my own mental health practice. This is something that just makes me feel better. It gets my creative juices flowing. I just always feel like a more productive human in society, better wife, mom, friend, when I am making sure that I get my sewing time in. But it can be hard. It can be really hard to make sure that we are making the time and getting some sewing in, and to feel like we're actually making a dent in our sewing and actually doing some creating and not just wasting time, basically. So that's what we're going to be talking about, 5 different tips just to help that sewing time, how precious it can be, to be just a little bit more productive, so we are getting some finished garments no matter how much time you have available. Okay, number 1, batch cutting and or assembly line sewing. Now, it's a fine line. Like I said, sewing is something that should be a relaxing practice. It should be a practice that helps, again, get your creative juices flowing. Now, can doing a whole bunch of batch cutting and like assembly type sewing, can that kill that joy? Absolutely. This is really a tip. Now, I do batch cutting almost a lot. I do batch cutting almost exclusively. But when it comes to assembly line sewing, I really only employ that if I am making something like, say, matching pajamas for, members of my family, where it's the same type of thing. Or I happen to be making a couple of different button-down shirts for my son and husband, and I can kind of do the steps in a row. So sometimes the assembly line sewing can absolutely make a difference, and it does make sense. But definitely the thing I want to drive home with this first tip is the batch cutting. I find cutting to be not nearly as fun as the actual sewing. It's one of my least favorite things to do. And when it comes to sewing, maybe taping together patterns and cutting those out might be the worst, but I also find that cutting out, my back starts to hurt after a while, even though I have one of the mats that are supposed to be good for your back and all that kind of stuff. I just find it quite tedious, even if I have on a movie or listening to a podcast while I'm doing it. But I do find if I can carve out a chunk of a couple of hours and cut out like 3 or 4 different patterns, it makes my actual sewing time so much more productive. And I find that I am amazed by how much that I can get done because I'm all set up at my cutting table. Especially if you're someone that doesn't have a cutting table that, if it's your kitchen table or your dining room floor or whatever it might be, it can be really beneficial just to be able to set aside some time, clear things out, set up your cutting mats or however you like to cut out your patterns, and just cut out, 3 or 4 things and have them all set and ready to go for when you do have some sewing time. And that goes into tip number 2. Making sure that you go ahead, now that you've batch cut everything, make sure that everything is prepped and ready to go. Make sure that you have the notions that you need for your project. So if you are making a button-up shirt, for instance, and you need certain pieces interfaced, go ahead, cut out that interfacing, get it fused to the pieces so it's all ready for you to start sewing. And group them together in like little packages. Put the thread you're going to use, the buttons you're going to use. If you're using bias tape, if a project requires a zipper or elastic, make sure you've got those things and it's all set with your little package so that when you're able to sit down and sew, you don't run into the, oh crap, I thought I had 1/2 inch elastic and I don't. Well, now I can't finish until I can find time to run to the store and get the elastic. It really saves any of that from happening. Making sure you have all the correct notions and products all ready to go before you make time to sew, which then comes into tip number 3, which is to sew in small increments. Like I mentioned, I am a mother, I am a wife, I'm a friend, I'm a business owner. I have a lot of demands on my time, and sometimes the me sewing time is not at the top of the priority list, so I have to sew in whatever pockets I have. Now, by doing the batch cutting, making sure I've got everything ready to go, if I can set aside 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes just to work on my project, you will be astounded with how those add up and how before you know it, a week goes by and you've got a button-up shirt. And gosh, I was really busy this week. How did that even happen? Because you were able to squeeze in some time just here and there to get a little bit of sewing in those little bit of pockets. Now, I do realize that this also assumes that you are able to leave your sewing things out. I have a dedicated sewing room, which makes me very spoiled, and I totally understand that. I know a lot of people have to set out and then pick up their machines and everything every time they sit down to sew, which can make sewing in small pockets a little bit more difficult. But if you, one week decide, you know what, I'm just going to kind of, shove everything just to the side, not put it away, just to kind of try and see if I can get this shirt finished, I absolutely would suggest trying that. Maybe not all the time, but if you've got a certain project you really want to see through, especially if you're on a timeline for it, it can be a great way just to put in those little bit of pockets of time, the 15, 20, 30 minutes. It's a cute, Nancy Zeman was a big proponent of this. Brittany J. Jones on YouTube, also on Instagram and everywhere else, she's a big proponent of this as well. So finding those little pockets of time where you can get some sewing in really add up and make a huge difference. Number 4, making sure that you make your sewing time a priority. Now, just remember that you are important and your mental health is very important. And if sewing happens to be a way that you take care of your own mental health, it is absolutely essential that you prioritize some time to be able to fit some sewing in. Just like you prioritize time for the gym or for working out or for meal planning or whatever it might be, it is also very important that you schedule some time in for you to be creative. This can also be, and this is for someone with an addictive personality who also struggles with ADHD as well, but I can really dig into something, which also means that, that could be a good thing if I'm digging into a sewing project and all of a sudden, a couple of hours have passed. But it can also mean, oops, I just binge watched 4 episodes of this TV show, or oops, I just scrolled Instagram for an hour and a half. It can very easily turn into those things. So being cognizant of those time wastes, where do I really need to be sitting on Instagram for an hour and a half? Probably not. Do I really need to play this game on my phone? Probably not. Maybe 1 episode of this show is all I need to watch tonight, not 4. So just being aware of those time wastes too, and finding those little areas where I could have absolutely been sewing during those other 3 episodes of the show that I just watched. Or, instead of scrolling on Instagram, I could have gotten quite a bit of sewing in had I just made the decision to make sewing a priority. So there are little pockets of time as long as we make it a priority and really try and squeeze some sewing in if that is what fuels you. And number 5, once you get the sewing bug and, you're feeling it, I highly suggest keeping in your queue a few easy wins. These are garments that they're going to fit, they're pretty quick and easy to make, and they're just going to help keep the momentum going. So you're not going to lose your sojo. If you're making a coat and then after that a pair of jeans and then after that a tailored blazer, you can very easily lose your momentum for sewing because you can get stuck in the weeds with some of those bigger projects. Not that you shouldn't tackle those bigger projects, but sometimes if you sprinkle in a palette cleanser in between those larger projects, you can really keep that momentum going and be surprised by the things that you're going to be able to create. And one of those palette cleansers for me is the Breckenridge Henley. So this is today's Feature Friday pattern. I have made up a beautiful one in this wonderful waffle knit that we're going to say is in the color Peach Fuzz, which I think it's the color of this year if I'm not mistaken. But I have customized with some Stoff cuffs that I got at a sewing conference earlier this year. You don't see these in the US very often. I know if you're across the pond in Europe or the UK, you can find these much more readily, easily available. But I grabbed a whole bunch at a sewing conference. I never see them anywhere here in the US. And I made this wonderful little Breckenridge Henley. So this took me very little time to sew. It is, I sewed my buttons just through the placket. So this is not a working placket because I would never unbutton them. And I even continued sewing buttons up to make it look like it was unbuttoned a little bit. Love this pattern. It's $5 today only. Today's December 6th, 2024. $5 today only, and you get really great bang for your buck for that price, because not only does it come with the shirt, but it comes with a couple of different sleeve options. It comes with a dress option, and the Henley necklines are so on trend this season. They're everywhere. Henley t-shirts, dresses, everywhere. So it is a great little palette cleanser and a great way to make sure that you are keeping that sewing momentum going. So I would highly recommend, if this isn't in your catalog already, that you grab one, grab the pattern when it's on this great deal. Perfect for sewing up for pajamas. This makes a great pajama top as well as a regular out, beyond basic knit top, which is how I will be wearing it. So that just to kind of cap off ways that we can make our sewing time more productive. Again, we all get into slumps. We all lose our sojo on occasion, and there's some other tips on how to get that back. But if you're just finding it hard to find time, especially as we're coming into a very busy season, to squeeze in some sewing time for you, hopefully these tips are going to make sure that you keep your sanity this holiday season. And this winter, it's going to get gray. It's going to be very gray here soon if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And these are just some great ways to make sure that you are staying creative and keeping your mind sharp and your hobby alive. And we all need hobbies. All right, that is it for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this content. If you'd like to find me over on YouTube, I'm here at TomKat Stitchery, or on my website, which is tomkatstitchery.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram at TomKat Stitchery Carmel, and I hope to meet each and every one of you over there. Have a great one. I'll see you next time. Bye.